Okay, so we left off in class last week talking about Romanticism, which is this other Enlightenment movement. It really begins at the end of the 18th century, about the same time as Neoclassicism, but it's much darker in thematic content. Both of Neoclassicism and Romanticism have to do with the idea of sort of focusing on mankind's intellect and reason, but for Romanticism, there's this idea that mankind longs to be free. And for Romantics, looking to the dark side of the human psyche was a way to investigate that freedom. So death is seen as the ultimate freedom. We get a lot of images that are focusing on dark themes, on death. Madness is part of that. We'll look at that today. But certainly also wild landscape is part of that as well. Because nature is, in fact, truly free, and only we humans are feel bound by rules and whatnot, right? Nature is more wild that way. And so these three themes, madness, death, nature, these things can all overlap each other within different pictures from the Romantic movement. Keep in mind that Romanticism has absolutely nothing to do with romance, right? That's not what the word is all about. So it has nothing to do with loving and kissing, right? Although those might enter into it, usually it means one of the lovers is going to die, right? Or crazy, right? But Romanticism is this particular movement in art, literature, theater, music, late 18th century onward, and throughout all of Europe and into America as well. Right? We had talked also, I'm not going to show you the pictures again, so I can torture you with that again. We talked about this interest within Romanticism for images that have a very, very strong emotional impact. And the term that was used in 18th and early 19th century aesthetics for this was the idea of the sublime, which is an aesthetic reaction that is so powerful regardless of whether or not it's a positive reaction. Right? Beauty causes a positive aesthetic reaction, but ugliness causes a negative one. And according to authors who champion the idea of sublime reactions, that's perfectly okay. That's every bit as valid and valuable. A reaction is a reaction of abhorrence, a reaction of disgust. And so when we looked at the wrath of the Medusa at the end of class, we were talking about the dead bodies in the foreground. This is true for liberating people in lust. Remember that these pictures are huge, right? Neither of them would fit in this room against this wall. That's how big they are. So that impact of the dead and the dying and the bleeding and the dismembered is that much more strong because it's right in your face. Right? These are hung up on a wall at about the 4-foot level, and that's where they must be hung, right? So you were right there looking at that guy's butt or that guy's navel, And the impact is one of this sort of almost disgust, but that's a strong aesthetic reaction. Disgust is. And in the Romantic period, this was seen as a positive thing. Right? I put up online a section that discussed romantic landscapes, focusing primarily on Britain, but also looked at some German landscapes as well. We haven't really looked at German art in a while, since Dürer or so. But Turner is the sort of the paragon of romantic landscapes and the power of nature, engulfing ships, drowning people, obliterating the sun. Right? This is all very, very romantic in spirit. So these are discussed online. We'll wrap up Romanticism today by returning to someone we looked at last week. Sorry, not last week, last class. Francisco Goya, the Spanish artist who, remember, had painted this very sublime, very dark scene of the slaughter of the Madrid people after they rose up against Napoleon's mercenary troops. As part of the Spanish uprising against Carlos IV, right? We're going to look at other works by Goya today. In addition to painting large-scale works like this, Goya was also a very active printmaker. And all the people that we've seen before who have been printmakers, like Dürer, right, or Rembrandt, have also been painters. Even Schongauer, who we saw at the very beginning, the first print that we looked at, the St. Anthony Up in the Air, he was also a painter, right? And so they usually did it in multiple media. And oftentimes we find very different compositions in each. It's not that they're using prints as a way to just duplicate what they were doing, but they see its value to do something entirely different, right? So this presents to us on the right, because we've already talked about one on the left, as a representation of death, one of these romantic themes. On the right, we have the representation of dreams, which kind of goes hand in hand with insanity. These times when the bounds of reason let go, where we're at our freest, right? Try to explain a dream and you realize how freeform they are, you know? I always thought it would be a great idea to keep a dream journal because sometimes it's some really cool junk that happens there. But at the same time, you know, who's got the time? And you'd never make sense anyway. So in this picture on the right, it's a print now. It's an etching. And it's actually given its Spanish title on the side of the desk, where our writer or maybe our artist, it's hard to say exactly what he's doing. We can't see. He's got a pen and paper. So it could be either a writer or a draftsman. But he's fallen asleep. And as it says there in Spanish, the sleep of reason produces monsters. Right? So sleep produces monsters. In other words, it's when reason falls asleep. Right? When reason goes away, then monsters come in. But if we're smart, if we think about things, the monsters aren't really there. Right? Your worst fears are usually because you're not really thinking about it, you know? And when you really think about it, it's not a big deal. The monsters, you know, the boogeyman doesn't exist. Right? There's nothing under the bed when you're a kid and you're asleep and you think there's something out there, right? That tree scratching against the house. It's a tree scratching against the house. It's not a dinosaur. You know? The sleep of reason, when reason goes away and we give way to our irrational thoughts, that's when monsters arise. Right? That's the point of this print. Right? So, as you can see, there's more to the title. Los Caprichos. This was part of a book of prints, a series, 80, 82, somewhere right in there. Right? A series of prints that he put out, numbered, you see the number in the upper right corner, number 43. Right? In this series of images that he titled Los Caprichos. The term Los Caprichos means folly, stupidity. We have an English word caprice that we don't use that much anymore, right? There's a Caprice Classic that used to be a taxi cab when I was living in New York, right? But a caprice is when you do something on a whim, right? You do it without thinking about it. Los Caprichos, the caprices, the follies, the foolishnesses, right? And the entire series of prints were prints about foolish behavior. That might sound familiar, right? Think about Bruegel. Way back in the 16th century, we saw the Netherlandish Proverbs, where we had people doing dumbass things, right? Or prior to that, Quentin Matsys with the money changer and his wife, or the ill-matched couples, where we saw examples of how not to behave. With the idea that when you see how stupid people can be, you go, oh, I better not do that, right? Because that leads to horrible things, right? Even, I think, Bosch, right? And the Garden of Earthly Delights is very much the same sort of theme. How not to behave so you realize the consequences of stupidity. You realize the consequences of foolishness. So, 82 different images. Now, I'm not going to show you 82 different images. We've got them all down at the National Gallery, which is nice. They're never out on view because works on paper deteriorate from life, right? So they keep them off. But you can make an appointment at the print room, 10 to 4, Monday to Friday. Call them up and say, I want to see the sleep of reason produces consciousness. And they'll say, okay, come on down, and they'll have you sign in. They love it. They love it, right? Give you a pair of white gloves and a magnifying glass. Go in and look at this. You go look at Rembrandt's 100 Gilda crystal, right? The Three Trees. They have a copy of that. Well, the whole run. So this is the print that appears immediately before that one in the book, right? You can see the numbers. Number 42. And sometimes the title appears outside the frame, like here, and sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes within. Right? So in this case, right, the title translates basically roughly into "they who cannot," which is a little elusive. It doesn't really explain it very well. But what's obvious here is this is stupid behavior. A donkey is a beast of burden. Donkeys are bred specifically to carry things. Right? They're pack animals. And for people to be carrying donkeys around on their back is the height of stupidity. Why carry around an animal that's bred specifically to carry around stuff? Right? Absolutely dumb. At the same time, some of the things I mentioned the boogeyman before, some of the things in it are particularly frightening as well. Because stupid behavior is not just funny, although in Goya's hands sometimes it is. Stupid behavior is also frightening. Right? This is our sublime idea that we talked about on Tuesday, when we had this special class on Tuesday classes. Right? The idea that horrific things, we're capable of horrific things as humans, right? When reason falls asleep. So here is the boogeyman, and a child terrified of the boogeyman. The two kids sheltered by the mother. And the figure, we don't even know if it is a scary figure or not, do we? The kids are afraid it could be his Uncle Joe. Played a joke on them, right? We don't know. Who knows? It could just be a stick, a broom, with a drape over the top of it, right? But they think it's the boogeyman because, for them, reason has slept, right? Yeah. Yeah, basically they were published in 1800, and it seems, based on Goya's, they didn't have a date on every one of them, right? But the group of prints seems to have been begun around 1797, 1798, and then printed, they're all done by 1800. So all 83, now, that might seem like an awful lot. Remember, with a print, right, what you do is you make the matrix. So you've got the plate that you've treated that you can rub the ink on, and then you print it on the sleeve. So each one of the plates has multiple impressions, right? So we don't have the only copy of this. And I don't think the plate exists anywhere, right? I think it got melted down or destroyed. Although we do have a Rembrandt plate down at the National Gallery. We actually have one of his plates. Interestingly enough. So each one of these then took a fair amount of time. At the same time, etching is quicker than engraving, because all you're doing is scratching through that wax. We talked about this before, right? You scratch through the wax, and the acid does the hard work of actually cutting the plate. All you do is sort of draw on it. So what we have from Goya are actual prep drawings for each one of them, right? So it makes it, he made the drawing first on paper, then transferred that, redrew it onto the plate, right, in reverse, because when it prints, it's going to come out the same way, right? And then printed them. Okay. So it's a good question, because you take 82 plates in 2 years, right? That's what 4 a month, give or take, right? Which is a healthy output, isn't it? And he's painting all the while as well. Right? He's a professional. This is what he does well. Now I want to talk a bit more about the etching process with these, right? Because, well, remember that this is where you cover the plate with, the metal plate with some wax, you cut into the wax, and you expose it to acid, and the acid bites the lines wherever you scratch through the wax. So you can see some lines on here, but you can also see that the background has this sort of gravelly sort of tone to it in each one of them, this various darknesses, right? This is also produced via etching, but through a particular process of etching that we haven't encountered yet. So etching we've seen with Rembrandt, right? And Rembrandt, when he achieves tone in the background, right, the range of darks that we have here, for Rembrandt he's doing it by cross-hatching, right? We talked about this before. So in order to come up with the tone, he'll come with a series of gradients, right, into the plane. this way, and it'll come back and cross-hatch over them. And the way a tone is lighter or darker is how close together the lines are, right? Or how many times you cross-hatch. You can get darker and darker lines then, right? And you come up with this sort of overall grayish tone that varies depending on that, right? The other way to make it darker is to make sure that the acid sits in the line and cuts them deeper. We talked about that in class as well. The detail of this to sort of illustrate that. But so Rembrandt is using this cross-hatching technique. There you can see it really clearly, right? How he's hatching one way, another way, over the top, and the tightness or the looseness of the line gives you the range of tones, and he's even able to alter it to give you some of textures back there as well. Goya is using a different technique called aquatint. And what you do with aquatint is instead of laying down wax, right, you lay down ground up resin, dried resin from the tree. You grind it up, right? You grind it up because it's dust. Right? Nothing like that. Right? You grind it up, and it was really fine dust, and you shake it over the top of the plate. And it's just like pollen on your car the other day. Right? The green pollen that we right? You then heat it up. It's a hot plate, right? Channel. And the resin melts. And it sticks to the plate. But it doesn't cover it consistently in these little holes. And that's how it gets that tone in the background. You then associate the acid hits the place where the resin didn't stick. Right? So all the white tips that you're seeing there are little globs of resin on the plate. Then you clean it off, right? And you've got this textured plate. Once you get that, you can then come over the top and etch it. Put down the wax, come back in and carve the lines. The benefit of doing aquatint is that you can get the effect that looks like a wash. You've done it with a brush. Because you can stock out certain parts of it using overall grayish tone. Much easier and actually much quicker than this, right? If he was coming back to the process, it would take that much longer, right? So aquatint is a form of etching, a particular kind of etching. It still uses acid, it still uses this relief form, but you get the tone in a different way. And what happens is that you bathe it in the acid at different time lengths. And the longer it's in, the darker the aquatint will get. So you'll notice the desk is lighter than the floor. Right? And the floor is lighter than the background. And some parts are perfectly white because he came back in with a brush and laid something down so that the acid would never touch that part of the plate. Right? So there we see this portrait of an artist, if you will. I don't think it's meant to be good because you can't see it. Or a writer or a humanist, right? A thinker, because he's writing. That's the whole point of the implement, is that he's a man who writes. And he's fallen asleep and he is attacked by his worst nightmares. Personified by these creatures of the night, owls and bats, and that wonderful lynx behind his chair, right? And how Goya uses the light and dark, especially the light in the eyes of that lynx, to make them that much more frightening. And the issue is, of course, that these things aren't really there. They're only there in his head, right? Because dreams have driven him away from reason. So this is a very, very enlightenment kind of message, isn't it? Reason is so important that when we lose it, bad things happen, right? But it so much focuses on the dark side of things that makes it very romantic, right? Rather than sort of neoclassical. Now, going hand in hand with the idea of dreams is, of course, the idea of insanity. Because dreams and insanity are both places where our minds just wander into places where rationality no longer exists. With John Everett Millais, we're in the country of England. Right? And much later, the Romantic movement lives throughout the entirety of the 19th century. I'd argue even in the early 20th century, we can find romantic painters still. And so here we are in England, middle of the 19th century. And again, this movement, the Enlightenment, is international. Right? Does anybody know who Ophelia is? Recognize the name? Yeah, Ian. Hamlet, right. And who is she in Hamlet? Right, and Hamlet's lover. She's Hamlet's fiancée. Right, so this is from Shakespeare. Okay? This is a scene from the play in Shakespeare. And actually, it never takes place in the play. It's that they talk of, in the play, Hamlet loses it, right? Hamlet is so consumed by jealousy and rage because his mother has had his father killed by his uncle, no less, right? So she starts to sleep with her husband's brother. The two of them plot kill his dad. And Hamlet wants revenge. That's the whole play, right? Is Hamlet the whole to be and not to be? Is about like, should I take revenge? Yeah? And as Hamlet becomes consumed with vengeance against his mother, and at the end of the play, everybody's dead, right? But as he becomes consumed with rage, he begins to be jealous of his fiancée Ophelia, and he starts to drive her crazy too by withholding his love from her. And there's one point in the play where it talks about the fact that she's gone off and killed herself. And how did she kill herself? And you don't see it. It doesn't happen on the stage, right? It happens off stage. It's never visualized. But some characters go, what happened to Ophelia? Oh, she's drowned herself, right? She's gone floating down the river with flowers. So that's what Millay is giving us here, is this scene from a play that's never really a scene from the play. Does that make sense? Everybody would have recognized it immediately as Ophelia. And in fact, 1948 or so, there's a Hamlet by Laurence Olivier, film version, won the Oscar Best Picture that year, right? When he stages the death of Ophelia, you hear the voiceovers from the staging he did, right? Enacted by an actress floating down the street. Became that powerful. It is every year the best-selling postcard at the Tate Museum in London. Every year, year in and year out. That is, I have a friend who's a Millay scholar. He's a goofball as well, but nonetheless, he's very proud of the fact that his painter's painting is the best-selling postcard of the Tate Museum in London, right? So here is floating down, about to be consumed by nature, right? She's gone crazy. She's lost it. And Shakespeare even mentions that as she's floating down, she's singing, right? She's gone crazy. So dreams and insanity tie into this idea where rationality disappears. The freedom of the human soul, interestingly, reappears. So we see the flowers floating down the river. It's immaculately painted. Millay is a fantastic renderer. He spent time out in nature making the plants from direct observation, and he left the part in the middle for the figure unpainted. He then went back to the studio, got her name is Elizabeth Siddall. She was the girlfriend of one of his painter friends. And he posed her in a bathtub so he could get the water just right. She got cold. The dad got mad at him for doing this, right? He wasn't going to be that exacting. Painting even the flowers outside. And it's just spectacularly refined in its rendering, down to the tiniest detail. Let's look at some of those details. There's her face. You can see the flowers floating out. Even at the sparkle of the water around her hand as it reflects there, right? And you can see how he's even picked up how the dress blossoms up with the air underneath it, as wet clothes will, right? So if they get air caught there, they can't come out. And how her hair then swirls out into the water. And that all came from direct observation. And even gives you these subtle clues as to the direction she's floating. She's floating off to your left, and you can see the reeds under the water that show you the direction the water's flowing. Even here in the corner, you see how some of them have caught on the branches here of the reeds. But it's so spectacularly and tightly painted. And it fits into this romantic idea, right, of nature as a power, as a force that can consume us. That's something we see in landscape painting as well. But also this idea of dreams and insanity as a place where the mind is free from all of the bonds of worldly concern. Right? Now, Millet was one of the founding members. By the way, he was a boy genius. He painted his first picture when he was like 16. And at this point, I think he's like 22 when he painted that, right? But 4 years earlier, he was about 18 years old. He and 5 other painters founded this group they called the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, and they published a manifesto about what they thought art should do, what they thought the problems were with art today in 1848, and what it should do. And the term Pre-Raphaelite suggests part of what the manifesto is all about. The manifesto said that European culture was in the toilet. It had just gone downhill, and it had been going downhill for about 350 years. That really, it started going downhill when Raphael died. So if we could somehow return art, culture, dial it back to the period before Raphael, we could make art good again. That's the manifesto, right? The only way to make art good again is to go back to the period before Raphael. And that's why they call themselves the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, right? Before Raphael, and brotherhood suggests sort of like monks, doesn't it? Monasticism, even though they are the least religiously oriented people out there. Well, one of them was. They're fairly religious, but they're sort of suggesting this idyllic time in the past, right? Which also is kind of a romantic conceit, that there was this perfect time back then, nostalgia for a lost time, right? So, in returning art to a style that had been lost in their mind for more than 300 years, this is part of the reason that Millet's paintings are so immaculately refined. Because when he looked at 15th century painting, art before Raphael, he saw an art that was more interested in very tight, sharply focused drawing, where instead of giving you loose brushstrokes that simply suggest things, he wants to study plants, understand how the veins of these reeds work, how the current would carry the loose parts of plants and hook them into those reeds. Who do you think he's most interested in before Raphael? Knowing that he's painting in this sort of tight, super detailed fashion, who do you think he's looking at? Who's he a fan of? Michelangelo, they liked him well enough because he had a lot of romance. He had a lot of sort of dark spirit and whatnot, right? But he's a little bit later than Raphael. Let's not get back earlier, back into the 15th century. Any guesses? Who painted with a sort of a really tight focus? Van Eyck. They love Van Eyck, and they wrote about it, right? The Arnolfini wedding was hanging in the National Gallery in London, which had recently opened to the public, like 1830s, right? They adore Van Eyck. They also love Fra Angelico, right? They love these 15th century Italian and Northern painters. And there's a certain similarity to the attention to detail in Millet's work and Van Eyck. So this is all part of this pre-Raphaelite agenda, which is very romantic, about dialing it back, about turning back the clock to a period when art was more pure, when art was better, when society hadn't been polluted for the last 350 years by progress, right? Well, that's it for Romanticism for now, even though, like I said, it goes on. There is this art fix online that talks about romantic landscapes in particular, not figurative pictures like this, but landscapes, right? And so there's a chance to sort of catch up on more of that with one of those short blurs online. We're going to move on and talk about the next major movement. This one does follow sequentially. So we talked about the fact that, if we think historically about the development of art since the Baroque, right? We had the Baroque period in the 17th century. And then that was kind of followed by the Rococo in the 18th century, early 18th century. Right? And then that was followed by neoclassicism, which is late 18th century. And at the same time, Romanticism, which was parallel, right? So we go to 1, 2, 3, I guess we go back here at the Renaissance and Mannerism. Right? Also late 18th century and into the 19th century. Okay? So those two are together. We're now moving, if you think of 1, 2, 3 here, to a new movement in the mid and late 18th century called realism. So the last two movements that we talked about, the last two isms, right, were parallel. They didn't fall sequential. Okay? But this next one that we're going to talk about, realism, comes sequentially after them. It sort of succeeds them as the new avant-garde, most modern art out there. Right? So I have to sort of turn the clock back a little bit here to look at Romanticism and Neoclassicism to sort of set this up. How did this new movement come into being? In the middle of the 19th century, 1840s to be precise, right? French art critics, looking at the annual salon, where we had hundreds of paintings by the Royal Academy members, looking at the salon, they started saying, you know what, Romanticism ain't doing it for me. Many critics said this. Neoclassicism isn't cutting it. Neither of these things are treating everyday subjects. And by everyday subjects, I mean things that are newsworthy, like the wreck of the Medusa. Right? They said basically, when people look back at pictures made in the 19th century, how are they going to find out what's great about modern French society? That's what the critics are saying, right? What they're going to see are newsworthy events that don't happen every day. What they're going to see are Roman pictures that are meant to be relevant for today. But what about now? What about what's great about French society here and now? Why can't we have pictures about that? Right? And these criticisms become louder and louder in the course of the 1840s, right? How will future generations know the greatness of this city of Paris that we're living in? Right? Like I said, every now and then we do get images that are of contemporary events, but they tend to be, like I said, news events. Right? And this began to fuel a desire among painters to paint scenes of contemporary life. Which is something we have not seen a lot of. Scenes of contemporary life. And this desire to paint scenes of contemporary life got stronger because of the politics of the time. Right? So we've got the art critics on the one hand, saying, give us scenes of today. Okay, we'll take up that challenge. But then when we look at the politics of France in the middle of the 19th century, that's going to give them another reason to do this. Okay? So back into the politics. Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People is a allegorical illustration, right? It's not something that actually happened. There's no naked people running around, naked women leading the troops. She's the inspiration for the revolution. This is the second revolution, the July Revolution of 1830, right? It set up what was known as a constitutional monarchy. This is the British style of kingship, of royalty, where the king's power is checked by a House of Parliament. Right? No one can do anything unilaterally. The king was Louis Philippe, right? The constitutional monarch of France, put into power because of the July Revolution, right? Now, unfortunately, Louis Philippe almost immediately, within 5 years, started to abuse power. And in particular, step on the little guy, which I guess is typical for kings, right? Not their concern. He became increasingly dictatorial, more and more. And Daumier here is a newspaper illustrator. This was in the Sunday paper. It got him locked up in prison for scandal, for libel, right? And he shows Louis Philippe in this caricature. He looks like his head made out of a pear. He actually published a drawing showing how to draw Louis Philippe as a pear, right? And it's called Gargantua, which is the title of a 16th century satirical play full of defecation and urination, and the French loved it, right? And it was about this giant who couldn't stop eating, right? Gorged himself. And here is Louis Philippe as Gargantua. And the way he's being fed is government bureaucrats on the right are collecting taxes from the poor. And they are taking these taxes, putting them in baskets, and running them up the ramp and throwing them into Louis Philippe's mouth. Right? There he is. It's a bit blurry. I couldn't find a really good large picture of this, right? Throwing this into Louis Philippe's mouth. There they are gathering the taxes, right? The poor and the impoverished, we have nothing, right? And Louis Philippe crafts out government documents, right? He digests the taxes. And what is he? Nominations for leadership, notes on law, reflections on power, and there are government people waiting to take them back to the halls of power, right? Now, he's in government, as it says, right, for almost 20 years, 1830 to 1848. And from about almost immediately, he's not liked well and has numerous abuses of power. He is overthrown in 1848 by Francis' third revolution, right? 3 different ones in the course of, 50 years? 60 years, right? And we have a painting by Daumier over in the Phillips collection showing the people rising up against Louis Philippe, right? The Third Revolution. Now, this little historical aside is going to add to this discussion of realism, okay? We had critics in the 1840s, in the years leading up to the Revolution, saying art needed to show everyday life better. In the aftermath of the Revolution, the new government that was instituted after the Revolution of 1848 focused its attention on trying to improve the lives of the common man, trying to eradicate hunger, trying to solve housing problems, trying to work on things that would make life better for the common man. So if we add these two things together, critics asking for artists to give us pictures of the common man, the government saying the common man is worth focus. Right? These things come together to this new movement called realism. Now, what is realism? It doesn't mean it's realistic. We just left Manet behind, who takes these totally realistic images of Shakespearean. But what realism means is not realistic in that sense. What realism means is it's real. Doing real things. Right? No more romantic brooding, although some of that still kind of lingers. No more exemplar virtutis, where we look to ancient Rome. Like real people doing real things. And because of the government's interest in trying to help the working class, that's what real things focus on. Right? So real people are real people across the entire spectrum. Right? Think of this as the antithesis of Rococo. the World Cocoa period, you saw nothing but aristocrats goofing off in gardens, right? Looking up girls' skirts and falling in love, right? This is hard work by real people. Right? That's what realism refers to. It's that's what they call it, realism. And it's a movement that will continue through the rest of the 19th century. The idea of focus. And it's different than we've been talking about. Really going back to neoclassicism, which is a part of the social conscience. If you paint the problems of the poor, people will pay attention to them. The city was huge, right about 90 feet across. It was blown up in World War II. It's interesting to see the fireball. So it doesn't exist anymore. That photo out there of it, right? But it's such an important picture because it's sort of the rallying cry of the realist movement. Courbet, the painter who painted this, was on his way to visit his hometown, which is in the foothills of the Alps. And on the way there, he saw two guys working on the road, breaking up the stone so they could smooth out the road that connected his own region with Paris. And he was so struck by the work, by what he saw, that he went back to his studio, posed, modeled, and recreated the scene. And what he wants to show is how hard this work is. The suffering of the working class. The idea that this work never ends. And if you look at the image, there's numerous ways he does this. They're leveling the road. Right? So it doesn't have to go over the top of that mountain. So it can be smooth so the carriages can move more easily. Right? We have a young boy and an old man. We don't get to see either of their faces. They're sort of like the guy who's working down at the corner of Glebe and Lee Highway, the gas line. You know? They're just kind of in the way. We don't have to pay attention to this. It's their work. That's what we look at. And that's how cool they kind of shows them. But this work is dehumanizing them. They're not well paid. Look at what they're wearing. Utter rags. Right? Tatters. Half a suspender, a ripped shirt. Patched old pants on the knees. Huddled down with the bright sun shining on it. The dirt of the ground becoming the color of their clothes. What does the young kid have to look forward to but growing old like this guy? Right? This is life for him. Hard work will get nothing but more hard work. Hard work won't get it out of it. This is about the suffering and the plight of the workers. And that's a key element of realism in the hands of French artists. Artists focusing on the troubles, right? The suffering of the working class. With the idea that if you shine a light on it, people will pay attention to it. Now, 1848 is a fairly monumental year. This is when the realist group first exhibits pictures. 1848. So this is the second year. And it happened in 1848 for a couple of different reasons that really come together to a perfect storm, inspiring this movement. One of them was these critics that we talked about, right? The ones who were saying, hey, we need art of the contemporary world. The second one was the Third Revolution, which brought about these social programs that brought the working poor to the attention of everyone. The third was a book published in 1848. One of the more important books, I'm not saying it's best, but it was certainly important for the development of European history, that had to do with labor, and that had to do with the working poor. The Communist Manifesto came out in 1848. Marx and Engels. Right? The history of society is a history of class struggle. Right? these things fed together. There was a strong socialist movement in France already by 1850. And the socialists in France loved this picture. They said it was the perfect illustration of the struggles of the working class. And they just adored it. They lauded it in the press. Right? This could illustrate Marx and Engels, right? And their ideas about how with industrial capitalism the poor will stay poor, and it will be the factory owners who get rich. Right? So, a condemnation of capitalism. That's one of the things that the socialist critics said about Courbet's Stonebreakers. He condemned capitalism. Courbet himself said it was the most complete expression of misery. Trying to document that. So this is what realism is. It's shining a bright light on injustice, with the idea that the painter has a role beyond making pretty pictures. Now, Courbet's not the only one. This very famous picture by Millet, Jean-Francois Millet, The Gleaners, also is part of this realist movement. He exhibited already in 1848. This is about a decade later. Right? And in this case, this relates directly to the Third Revolution. In order to feed the hungry, in order to help the poor, one of the things that the French government did was to reinstitute an old medieval custom, which was called gleaning. In the Middle Ages, a peasant, the underling of the lord, after the fields had been harvested, could go out, and anything that had been left behind was theirs for the taking. That's what gleaning is, picking up the dregs, the stuff that's been left behind. And in the Middle Ages, a feudal lord said this was okay. After the first pick of the field, you can go back and grab what's left. And in 1848, the government, trying to feed the poor, said, hey, what about gleaning? What a great way. We'll get them to go out there. They can, once the field's been harvested, people can go feed themselves. Right? They won't be prosecuted for going out to someone else's field and picking up the scraps. Right? This was obviously somewhat problematic, because why don't you just feed them with the stuff you're getting from the first cut anyway? Right? If you look at how Millet is commenting on this, you'll notice that our three gleaners, they're statuesque. They've got some nobility to them, right? They're not like, I don't know, you don't look down on them, right? He gives us some individuality. He has a different colored hat, you know? But he also gives you the sense that there's no way that they're ever going to get enough food to feed themselves, right? They've got a few strands of wheat, but how much do you need to feed a family? You know? How much do you need to make a loaf of bread? Right? You're going to grind your own wheat. It's quite a bit, right? They don't have enough. The gleaning plan probably isn't going to work. You add to that those mountains of grain in the background. Right? Just how much is there? And this is, you can see people, the first harvest, gathering it up and just piling it on hay carts in great mountains, working in teams. And this is, in fact, an industrial farm, right? They're making grain not to feed people from this region, but to be shipped somewhere else and sold somewhere else for the profit of the guy who owns the farm. This is picked up by the field boss on the horse, right? And all of the living houses in the background on the right. There is, Millet's comment is there is enough to feed everybody. Easily enough to feed everybody. But the government has decided to make these people do something demeaning in order to try to eat. And shouldn't everybody eat? By the way, to today, in France, a loaf of bread, the price is set by the government. It's very, very low. Right? If that gets about €1.50, right? What's your baguette cost you down in Erewhon, right? It's about 350, and they're better over there too. This idea of, everybody should have a loaf of bread, right? Your daily bread is something that has eventually been picked up. So he's commenting on this idea that of the gleaning practice, right, of picking up the scraps in order to simply eat. Again, this fits directly into something that Marx wrote about. He talked about capitalism as a new form of wealth generation. And one of the things he talked about was dialectical capitalism. It's one of his big complaints about the capitalist system. And I'm not saying that you have to believe this, right? It's just this is of the period. This is what was in the air when Millet was painting. The concept of dialectical capitalism, it's a mouthful, is that in industrial capitalist societies, workers do not work for their own profit. Workers work for the profit of someone else. Someone else gets rich off of other people's work. Right? So even the people in the background of this painting are not profiting as much as they're producing for someone else. This is what Marx called dialectical. And I think he's kind of spot on a certain level, and that's the way it works today, right? Does an Apple employee make as much money as the products that they build? More immediate level. Your tuition pays for 5 classes. You can take 6 for the same amount, right? But you're supposed to you take 1/5 of that for one class, and you multiply it by 25. I don't make anything near that, right? And yeah, some of it goes to heating the building, and some of it goes to paying for insurance, and some of it goes to keep the pool clean, But there's also some people who think fairly wealthy out of this, right? We're making some money from this. So, the dialectical capitalism works everywhere. I'm giving you hopefully giving you some education, right? And you're paying for it. But the money is not going between you and me. In the same way it would if I were a tutor, right? So it's a system that's still there. And in industrialized societies, it's amplified, isn't it? Because you've got people who own the factory. And they're the ones who profit from the factory. And the people who work in it. Now, I'm not trying to get you guys to buy into socialism. That's not the point of this. These are ideas that were current when Millet and Courbet were painting. And both of these works, this and the Stonebreakers, are people who are working for someone else's benefit in a way. Right? The background here, the foreground there. And so this realist movement that is focused on labor, right? Hard manual labor, the working class, are images that are very much inspired not only by the Third Revolution, but also by these new economic, political ideas that are circulating strongly beginning in 1848. We've got some Millets locally. National Gallery doesn't really have a great one, but there are 3 or 4 really good ones up at the Walters in Baltimore, where we see, you begin to recognize the style for Millet. It's fairly consistent. The one to the left is rather large, the one on the right quite small. A potato harvest. And it has the same sense of the dignity of our farmers rising sort of above the level of the horizon, sort of statuesque and bulky. And sort of working hard. Now here, I think we can abandon that idea of dialectical capitalism. They seem to be working for themselves. They seem to be gathering the food for their own family, and there's something about it that's championing that idea. Realism isn't always about suffering, right? But it is almost always about labor. And our figures here are gathering these. One wonders if it's not slightly romantic in this idea of a sort of a perfect past where industry hasn't spoiled everything yet, right? So, realism is a movement, right? It's focusing on contemporary lives. And this is really what's, I think, so important about realism as a movement, is this shift in focus to here and the now. Right? We're going to stop seeing religious pictures altogether from this point forward. We're going to stop seeing historical pictures altogether from this point forward. With realism, we'll wrap up today, which is 15, 20 minutes left, but we'll wrap up today talking about the most important of the realist painters. And really, for my money, one of the best people to ever pick up a brush, Edward Manet. Let's see, how do I want to say this? I have my notes in a particular order. I always get off of them, and that's what takes us so long, right? This is something he saw on the way home, kind of like Courbet. Courbet saw the stonebreakers on the way home, and he went home and he posed models to recreate what he'd seen. Manet had the same thing happen. He was in the train, he was on his way home, looked out the window of the train, he saw people having lunch, and he decided to go recreate it at home, right, with models that he posed. So it's a scene of the contemporary world, of everyday life, right, of the modern world. And that makes it very similar to other realist painters, and this is the movement that we put Manet in, the realist. We'll talk more about that categorization in just a little bit. But he's different from the other realists. So like Courbet, he saw something on the way, he reposed and he worked in the studio to bring it to fruition. The big difference should be fairly obvious. No work, right? These are utter relaxation. This is the upper middle class. They're nicely dressed, the ones that have clothes on are nicely dressed. They're not the working class. They're not the poor. But it is contemporary France, contemporary Paris. One wonders if this isn't a commentary. We've got the working poor. We've got the idle rich. Could it fit into that same idea of social paintings achieving social justice by showing the disharmony between different parts of the world? That's a possibility. But Manet himself was quite wealthy. Of the entire group of avant-garde painters he hung out with, he is by far the wealthiest. He tended to foot the bill for dinner as often as not for his friends who were also painters. Over and above that, the models are his brother here. The other one is his brother-in-law. Right? These are members of his family who posed for him. So this complicates the idea that the luncheon on the grass is meant as some sort of social commentary aimed against the well-to-do. Instead, what Manet seems to be doing, and this is what I think makes him such an interesting artist and so important for the history of art, he's making a modern version of older pictures. He's going to take a kind of art, a theme, kind of subject matter that other painters have done, and he's going to make a modern version of it. Okay? In this case, we've got people frolicking in the woods. Right? The nakedness of the woman suggests a little hanky-panky, maybe. So certainly, this is a modernized version of a Rococo picture. Right? Love in the garden. And Manet certainly seems to be tapping into that. Right? And people recognize it as being that. The fourth member of the party in the back taking a little bath. Right? So it adds a bit of a narrative. It's like they've gone out there for their picnic. There's the food in the corner. There's clothes down there as well. The women have decided to go for a little swim. They've taken a boat off, right, to the secluded corner where you can get away with this sort of thing. And the naked woman in the foreground has come out of the water, we presume, and is now sitting around with the two guys. I love this idea that they're not at all concerned with her. They're talking about philosophy. They're French, right? They're sort of like they're into each other. And she's there, and she's looking at you, right? Which is kind of an important thing because when Manet is casting his net for doing this modern version of old French art, right? He looks everywhere, and he makes it very, very artificial. He looks back at Renaissance prints. So this is a printmaker who worked with Raphael. His name is Marc Antonio Raimondi. And this is Paris choosing between three goddesses, other gods languishing around as Paris judges. And you'll notice that the arrangement of the figures is a direct quote from the lower right corner of the script. Right? He's doing homage to a lot of old art and bringing it into modern 19th century France. Also, which has obviously come to mind, is the painting in the Louvre that we've talked about before. We've seen other artists respond to this picture. By Titian, the Venetian Renaissance painter, where we saw two guys hanging out in the woods with naked women around them. Manet is giving us a modern version of that as well. So you can see this picture is just reference heavy, isn't it? It's full with these sort of things that a knowledgeable viewer would associate it with. And he submits it to the Salon in 1863. The judges would all have known these references. They would have picked up on them right away. Right? A modern love picture, a modernized Titian. But it's so drastically different in so many ways. Right? Our women here don't know you're there. Right? Titian's women aren't looking at you. The one that's engaged with the other two is looking at them. Our naked woman isn't at all concerned with them. She's sitting next to them in really close proximity with her toe and his ankle. Right? But she's aware of you. Right? She's addressing you. So that means that Titian's women, we can argue, are safe. They're personification. They're muses. Right? Marc Antonio's naked figures are God. That makes us safe. Right? It's got this narrative where God is supposed to be naked. So that's okay, right? Greco-Roman sculpture. We're fine with this. Titian's woman is in your world. She knows you're there. Right? She's reacting to your presence. That means that she's not in the past. She's not a goddess. She's not a muse for these two fellows' discussion. Right? She is part of your world. And that makes it really uncomfortable. Right? Direct gazes can be very uncomfortable things. Direct gazes with naked people even more so. Right? Her eyes are not averted. This makes this picture problematic for viewers. Right? Because what Manet has done is make all these references to transfixes, but then he strips away allegory, mythology, narrative, all of that's pulled out of it. And what we're left with is a scene of everyday life of people behaving inappropriately. And you're complicit in it. Because she's looking at you. You know she's there. And look at her face. It's like what you see? You know, she's not trying to cover up. She's utterly unabashed. And for Titian, this is all well and good if they're Venus figures doing this. Right? But for a woman of today to do this made the picture very, very problematic. And critics, when he submitted it to the Salon in 1862, they hated it. They absolutely hated it. They thought he was making fun of tradition. He wasn't. He was doing sort of the sincere modernizing of past kinds of art. Right? But it met with the most fierce reaction. Like I said, her clothes are here in the corner. They're just sort of flopped away, and that adds to the impropriety. She has a hat, she has bloomers, right, and a dress with a bow on the back of it. None of that is anywhere to be seen on her anymore. So the impropriety, the lack of these things that make a figure safe, narrative, mythology, history, all of these things irritated the people who saw this picture. The other thing that irritated, and the other reason they thought that Manet was just making fun of everybody, is the way that he paints. Manet was the opposite of that Ophelia picture we just saw. If you look at Manet's pictures, you realize that when he lays down strokes of paint, he makes almost no effort to blend them. So if you look at that bottle, the flask, that's laying behind the basket, the reflections on it from a distance look like silvery reflections, but you get up close and you realize he just got a swipe of white paint across the gray. If we look at the oranges, or the loaf of bread, or the cherries spilling out of that basket, you realize the degree to which it's a minimum of action and no sense of resolve or polish. And this bothered people. Right? So sorry, these are coming up out of order. He submitted it to the Salon in 1863. It was rejected. It's a huge picture, 6 or 7 feet across. They said, no, we don't want it. But that year, the Salon judges were particularly harsh, and they rejected about half of the pictures that came in. There was public outcry, and they mounted a second exhibition of the refused pictures, the rejections, the Salon de Refusés. And that year, you've got the normal Salon, the safe one. You've got the rejected Salon. Guess where everybody went, right? Everybody likes a scandal, right? Everybody went to see this, and everybody was shocked at Manet's Luncheon on the Grass. That was the centerpiece of the shock. I meant to have this up earlier so you could see Manet's paint treatment and the degree to which he loads his brush up with paint, and for that orange in the middle, right? From orange this way to orange this way, and a little bit of dark orange around it. No blending whatsoever, right? This bothered the critics. What's interesting about that element of Manet's paint, is that, and this is why I think he's so incredibly fascinating. We've got about that. When you look at Manet's painting, you start to look at it in two different ways. And this is true for what every painting does. Every painting exists in two different realms. When we talk about what is this, it's two guys in conversation with a naked woman, and another woman in the back next to a computer in the wall. When we talk about what a painting is, we talk about its subject matter. We talk about what it's depicting. Right? It's a still life. It's the daughters of King Philip IV of Spain, the Velasquez and the Foreman. It's a self-portrait of Rembrandt. Right? We talk about what it is based on what it's depicting. And that's one realm of a painting's existence, is the illustration. Right? But on the other hand, what is this? I think we were saying it's a bunch of oil paint on a piece of fabric, right? It has a separate existence. One existence is what it illustrates, the other existence is what it physically is. It's paint on a surface. Right? And by leaving the paint so obvious, where it's not just blended, where when you look at the orange, you can recognize it as an orange, but you can also recognize it as strokes of paint. Manet is balancing the two, right? He's saying it exists in both of them, and you become as if you were aware of them, both of them at exactly the same time. Yes, it is an illustration, but a painting is also an object. Right? So a roughly two-dimensional object. Arguably very three-dimensional, but roughly two-dimensional object. And that is calling your attention to that. And if you think about that idea, what is a painting? A painting is a representation, and then it now brings to the forefront the idea that a painting is an object, a flat surface with color on it. Right? If we think about the Manet being the one that's really bringing that forward to this issue, in all of this pictures. standing at the beginning of modern art. Just think about where modern art wound up. No representation. I love laundry. I had to wear laundry. I was over in the Philippines. Right? Hey, with laundry days, the laundry washer looked at, right? What is paint? Taking it as a picture of something? That's a representation. But a paint is also just a flat thing anyway. So if we think about modern art as a movement toward non-representation, right? A movement toward abstraction. There's the first step. And Art Department today called Manet the father of the moderns. These things are truly modern. And when people started to rally to this effect, there's one of the questions about what do you think? What do you think? Right? Is this a proper subject? Well, Manet's a paper. One of the critics was to say that it doesn't matter what you think. It matters that you did think. There it is, right there. That's one thing in a nutshell. It doesn't matter what it is. It matters that it is. Manet is telling us that the important thing about thinking is not necessarily something else. But there's a tension there because the something else is so very important, isn't it? It goes back to ancient, Renaissance Italy, right? It goes back to the history of French painting. That's what the world goes on. So the subject matter is something very important, but the thing is not the only thing. Right? This is such a fascinating painter for exactly this reason. Right? I think we don't have time to talk about it, so we'll pick her up and move into Impressionism on Monday. Right? So remember, at the beginning of the class, we talked about the fact that there were art fixes that you'll need to go to in order to finish some of those worksheets, right? There are more worksheets up. There are now, I think, 14 out of the 16 are up now. I'll be getting you comments on your progress report, your annotated bibliographies, as soon as I can get to them. I've got something that the university wants me to do tomorrow morning, and I have another class tomorrow afternoon, so I'm thinking tomorrow night, Saturday morning, right? When I'll get those to you.